Hey, it's Scott Petrak with another episode of the Brown Zone Coverage Podcast. The draft is drawing near, and the Browns are hosting their final pre-draft visits and finalizing their plans, particularly with the number two pick. Back to discuss the draft and more is Tom Withers, longtime Associated Press reporter, who's filling in again as Dave Chudowski finishes his recovery. Hey, Tommy.
Scott, how you doing, bud?
I'm good.
Let's get this rolling.
Yeah.
You got one eye on the Masters, I assume.
I was just going to say, I'm taking a little break from the Masters to talk a little Browns.
I'm taking a little break from the stock market and the
Oh,
Masters to
geez.
talk a
Yeah.
little Browns, which is makes you feel good. What's going on?
Well, Tommy, we're close. This is 2 weeks away. 2 weeks away, right? It feels close.
Oh
It
my
also feels
God.
about a million miles away still.
Yeah.
A lot to go, a lot to happen, can still happen these next 2 weeks, but we're here right now. So 2 weeks away, who are you saying the Browns pick at number two?
Yeah, boy, it sure sounds like it's not a quarterback, doesn't it? I think Scott, given, all that you and I know about the quarterback situation here and how long this has gone on and how they've been trying to get it right for so long. I think if they had settled on Sanders, we'd be hearing it.
Yeah.
And we seem to be hearing just the opposite, don't we? It seems like he's starting to free fall in this draft where people are talking about the potential that, he slides into the teens or into the 20s or as far as 33 and the Browns would have a second swing at him. So I don't know. I was kind of fascinated by the whole showcase out in Boulder, where it seemed like Sanders checked most of the boxes from what we heard from a lot of the national guys, and even Mary Kay was out there,
Mhm.
and a few others. It sounded like Sanders performed well. It sounded like he handled himself, real well in terms of the media. I guess he had a good visit with the Browns, et cetera. And I just felt like if they were sold on him, I would think, Scott, given, as I said before, all that they've dealt with the quarterback situation, that we'd be hearing that this is our guy and we're ready to roll. And that's not what we're hearing. Do you get the same kind of vibe?
I do. I think that's legit, Tom. Part of me says, the Browns like to keep everything close to the vest.
Yeah,
If they loved Sanders, I'm not sure we would know it, but I do think somebody would know it and it would start to get out there. Now, there's still time for that to happen.
true.
Um, and we have to be careful at this time of year. You talked about a free fall, and I certainly think that's possible. And I've seen the same stuff you have,
Yeah,
but that doesn't mean it's true. I mean, the Giants could take him at three, right? Like I'm thinking about doing a first mock draft a couple weeks out, and my number one question is, well, first of all, who are the Browns are going to take it to? But then it's, let's say the Browns don't take Sanders at two. Do the Giants take him at three?
right.
And then you got to ask that question almost for every team, right? Not the Patriots because they have Drake May, but any team that's iffy on quarterback, then it's okay. Does he go six to the Raiders? Does he go nine to the Saints? Like you just have to go through it. And the draft is going to revolve around Shadur Sanders
Yeah,
because he's such a big question mark. And it's obviously the position he plays is so important and teams need it. And guys get pushed up, right? We talk about a free fall, guys get pushed up. So does he go two or three, and then Jackson Dart goes nine, and then we're having a different
correct.
conversation about the quarterbacks. So it's there's so much unknown, but I think your overall point is correct, Tom. That it feels like the Browns are not married to him at number two. I think
Right.
Jimmy Haslam at the owners' meetings when he talked to a small group of reporters a week and a half ago talked about not forcing the quarterback, and I wrote about that earlier in the week. To me, that's the decision the Browns have to make.
Yeah,
And if it's going to be force a quarterback, you don't do it. But where's that gray area between force and nudge, between force and acknowledging how important quarterback is, and you have to get one. You have to get one,
right.
right?
Right.
So
Yeah.
we've talked about it, Tom, and we're going to keep talking about it. But if you don't take Sanders at two, then the question for me, whoever it is, Hunter, Carter, that's great. And maybe you get a generational, all pro player. The next question or the immediate question for me is, what do you do at quarterback?
What's the
So,
plan? Right.
right? And it could be Tyler Shuck at 33 or Jackson Dart at trade up to 25, whatever. Right? There's other ways you can do it, but you have to do it. And you have to find that guy. And maybe it's you don't draft one high and you take a flyer on Kyle McCord and then you go trade for Kirk Cousins. Like maybe that's the plan. But you have to have a quarterback plan. And in my opinion, it can't be Kenny Pickett. right?
I yeah.
So that's the whole backdrop for number two.
I wonder, Scott, if they feel if they feel stronger about Kenny Pickett than you and I do, or most of
Well,
the fans do. And listen, he was a number one pick just 3 years ago, right? Um, a small sample size in the pros. What I think 25 starts. I think he's 15-10. He's never really impressed me. I mean, but by the same token, we've seen guys bloom, later in their careers, right? You didn't think Sam Darnold would become what he is now, right? Were you convinced that Baker Mayfield would be, the quarterback that he is right now? So I would caution people to maybe, I don't know, give Kenny Pickett a fair shot, and I'm sure the Browns are going to. But you're right. I mean, they still have to have the alternative plan, whatever it might be at quarterback. Now, let's say, okay, let's skip on Sanders for a second and
yeah.
focus on Hunter. The little bit of pushback that I want to give about him, Scott, in just thinking about it, and you've been around the NFL as long as I have. How many guys are really capable of playing both
Yeah.
positions? In today's game, I think it's very difficult to say that, okay, we're going to start this guy at wide receiver in the slot or wherever it is you want to put him. And obviously he's got all the physical tools to put him wherever you want to put him. But then can you really put him in for a package of defensive plays or vice versa? Could you start him at cornerback and theoretically really put him on the field on offense? I mean, you and I have been watching this game a long time. I mean, Deion Sanders did it to a very small degree, right? And then there's guys that have been used in special packages, and everybody from Mike Vrabel to
Right.
there's a few other guys.
Yeah.
So
Champ
I'm
Bailey,
really
that kind of guy. Yeah.
yeah. So I'm really pushing back on that aspect of Hunter. And then the other thing I question about Hunter is if you're going to take him at number two. I'm not even sure he's the best wide receiver in this draft, to be quite honest with you. There's some really good guys that I think are going to go mid to late first round that I could argue, and just in my evaluation and
Mhm.
watching, some of the more high profile teams, the Golden Kid at Texas, the Tez Johnson kid at Oregon, I like they got Egbuka at Ohio State.
Yeah.
There's several guys that are definitely in the conversation with Hunter. So I think if you've decided that you're not going to go quarterback, and if you're going to go with Hunter as your wide receiver, then God, Scott, he better be special. And I mean, he better be special to an extraordinary level.
Yeah, those are great points, Tom. I think he is the best receiver in the draft. And I don't watch as much college football as you do, but
Right.
I've watched a bunch of him and I loved
He's
his,
special. There's no
yeah,
doubt.
I loved his receiver tape. The Browns think he has like, unparalleled ball skills. And that's why when Andrew Berry said at the combine that he sees
Yeah.
him as a receiver first, it was a little contradictory to what other teams feel.
No doubt.
And a lot of that is because it's easier to play full-time corner and then you play X number of snaps at receiver.
On wide
Like
receiver, right.
you could teach a guy to run, here's your game plan. Here's your 12 routes or your 4 routes you got to run, whatever it is this week. It's a lot harder to spend all your time or most of your time in the receiver room and then say, okay, we're going to put you at 20 snaps outside guarding Jamar Chase, or we're going to put you in the slot, which is really hard to play anyway. But if you say, okay, you're going to be our slot guy this week, well, what if the team goes 3 wides and you're out there 60 snaps? So it's easier to say corner's your number one position. So it was interesting and noteworthy when Andrew Berry at the combine said the other way around.
Yeah.
And I think in his point was his ball skills are just that great. But to build
Yeah.
on your point, Tom, I think you have to be special receiver to be the number two pick in the draft. And we're
Agreed.
talking Calvin Johnson. And I don't know Travis Hunter's Calvin Johnson. So therefore, for him to be, we talk value. That's what the draft is about. For his value to be worth number two, he's got to play on both sides of the ball. Like
Yeah, I
I
think you're
really
right.
feel that way. So then it's up to the team. How can you manage that? And I think it's a fascinating discussion where the physical toll, the bigger
Exactly.
bodies, right? The
Exactly.
17 games a season, there's a toll there.
Yeah.
Now, I agree with Pat Shermer told me this a month and a half ago that the NFL game is slower and not from a play in, play out
I know
standpoint,
what you're saying.
from
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
between snaps, right?
Yep.
There's more time. Teams don't go hurry up. Teams don't run 95 plays a game like you see in the Big 12. So he thinks he'll get a break, and Dion said the same thing at the pro day. So I think there's a balance there where, like aerobically, he'll be able to handle it, but physically, you're going to have to manage that. So it's going to be a lot on the team. But I do think he adds value and can have an impact on both sides of the ball, which is why right now I think he's probably the likely guy to be the pick at number 2. And it's fascinating. And while we're on this, I'm going to go back to Kenny Pickett in a second. But while we're on this, so we'll take Shadur out of it for now. Travis Hunter versus Abdul Carter. Who do you take at number 2?
See, I think I take Carter only because of what that means with pairing him with Myles Garrett and having a defense that can be an offensive defense, if you will, right? Yeah. That can turn the field over, make things easier on a young quarterback or Kenny Pickett or whoever it is that you end up giving the job to. So I'm really intrigued by that kid, Scott. I think I've told you that every time I watched him, he was the best player on the field. And I think you could probably say the same thing about Travis Hunter every time you watched him, right? But Carter to me is the safer pick here. Back to Hunter for a second. If there's plenty of guys that could probably do this, Scott. So if this two-way player is so unique, why don't other teams do it? Why isn't Justin Jefferson then playing cornerback in certain packages for the Minnesota Vikings? You know what I mean? Like, I just don't know if it's really doable. I'll be quite honest. I think it sounds great. And because of his track record at Colorado and the fact that he was able to do it, and Pat Shurmur, I mean, Pat's not going to talk him down. Obviously, he's gonna build up the case for this kid because he likes him and he's a smart player, and obviously he seems to be a really good culture guy, et cetera, et cetera. But if I had to pick between the two of them, I think I'd go with Carter, Scott, given where the Browns are at right now. I think there's still enough of a market, as I mentioned earlier, at wide receiver where you could pick one up, a little bit further down. And I just think the idea of, 95 on one side and 11 on the other with Schwartz turning those guys loose could be really something special.
Yeah. Here's the thing about the draft that is why I love it and why it gets you to pull out your hair. Because if you look at Carter, nothing you said is wrong. And if you're going to try to win games 20-17 or however they might have to win games this year, it starts with a dominating pass rush. And the way you do it is you pair Myles Garrett with Abdul Carter. And for years, we've talked about it, Tommy. I've loved the idea of getting a young guy with Myles. And they haven't done that. And Myles.
No, right. Clowney was that kind of guy, but he was older and a little, And
Clowney, Smith, Darius Smith, Olivier Vernon before that.
Yep.
So I love that idea. And then, can he take the mantle from Myles 6 years from now? Whatever. I just like that idea. The older, great Myles with the young guy. But when you take the draft in its totality, like the Browns have a million needs.
They certainly do.
One of them is not outstanding defensive end. Like, they have that guy. They have the transcendent defensive end. They have depth at defensive end with, Joe Tryon, Shoyinka, Alex Smith, Obo Karanko is still on the roster. Isaiah McGuire, like they have guys that can play that position, and they have an elite guy. So that doesn't mean you don't take him. I just think it's part of the puzzle. So I just think these are all these things that Andrew Berry and company have to weigh, and it doesn't mean you don't take Abdul Carter. But I do think if you're making the list, I think the list for Travis Hunter is they need a receiver. You can always use more depth at corner, especially if we don't know the future of Greg Newsome II. Martin Emerson Jr. is coming off a down year. But especially receiver. Like, they need a receiver. They need playmakers, period, on that side of the ball. So the need is Travis Hunter fills a need as opposed to Abdul Carter. That doesn't mean that's the reason you should pick him, but I think it's part of the discussion.
Yeah, 100%, Scott. I think we're going to probably end up getting a right-hand turn here at some point where it's going to shift from Hunter to Carter. I think in the days leading up, it could be a smokescreen. Who knows? Yep. There might be somebody else at the top of the board that is as in love with Hunter as several teams are that know that they're probably not going to get a crack at him. So listen, you and I know that there's all kinds of misinformation still going on, even though we're all 2 weeks away, right? 2 weeks from today.
Yep.
We get it going. So, I think the debate is fascinating, especially given where the Browns are at right now. And then, never mind, the Garrett fiasco from this offseason and them showing him the offseason plans and maybe what that consisted of. And if it was a pairing at the other side, which is really got him excited beyond seeing all the zeros on the contract. So yeah, listen, you know that this is if you and I are debating this and Browns fans are
Right.
on a daily basis, you know that this was what's going on over at 76 Luke Rosa Boulevard.
Yeah, and it's not easy, right? It's not an easy
No, it's
decision.
tough. Yeah, I'm
And
with you.
and I want to go back to the quarterbacks real quick here, Tom. First, Pickett.
Sure.
When you talk about Pickett, you're right. The Browns at the owners' meetings, it's the first time I felt they really talked up Kenny Pickett, and maybe that's because it was the first really availability they had. Maybe it's
Right.
because they see the landscape of the quarterback situation and go, okay,
Right.
who knows who they're going to get in the draft if they don't take Sanders at 2. All the free agent guys, they're left with Joe Flacco and Carson Wentz, it feels like. We don't know
Yeah.
about Kirk Cousins. So there's not an inevitability, but there's a growing maybe probability that Kenny Pickett could be the guy. And
Yeah.
I think you have to brace your fans for that. You have to get on board. You have to pump people up, I guess, is the
Yeah.
term. So I think that's part of it. And you're right. For former first round pick, 15-10 as a starter, there's some things there to like and to hang your hat on. You also have to look at, I mean, we saw this guy play live, Tom, and never was I blown away by him,
Oh, I
right?
know.
I
I
saw a
know.
stat the other day and I looked it up and it's true.
Right.
He started 25 games. He's thrown for 200 yards 10 times, 300 yards once, and he's thrown for more than one touchdown one time.
Right.
So he's not lighting it up. Now they had a bad offense coordinator. There's things you can talk. You can talk to people, and there's excuses that can be made. There's
Right.
reasons for why he didn't excel in Pittsburgh. He was not better last year. I think the year in Philadelphia helped him. Um, so, but it's a long shot that he's going to become the guy, and
It
maybe
is.
he could be a fine bridge. But I just don't have a whole lot of excitement there.
Yeah, and I don't have to tell you this, Scott, but his association with Pittsburgh, not only playing there at the university, but then for the Steelers, kind of, colors our view of
Right,
him, right? I mean, a
right.
lot of people, right? They don't want a Steelers castaway, right? They don't,
Yeah.
there's all that viewpoint. I can, and I agree with you, Scott. It felt like it was the first time, and you're right. I mean, they haven't had many media availability since his signing, but it did feel like they were getting people prepared for that. And I think there's still a veteran quarterback to be signed here. The big argument I hear from people about this year, and then the potential of passing on Sanders at number 2 is that, oh, what are you going to do? Wait around another year for next year's draft? And I like to remind people that you're not necessarily waiting around for next year's draft. Look at how much the quarterback market has changed in the last couple of years, Scott, right? I mean, quarterbacks have always moved around the league, but you see it even more now. So I would remind people that, look, there's going to be a quarterback out there that's going to be at the end of his contract. There's going to be a quarterback out there who's in disagreement with his coaches and wants the hell out. There's going to be movement. So it doesn't mean that, if you pass on the number 2 guy this year, that means you're waiting around to find a quarterback in next year's draft. You can find quarterbacks other ways. I mean, my God, they signed Joe Flacco off the couch 2 years ago and went to the playoffs or last year. So, there's a lot of ways to get to that franchise quarterback. Ideally, clearly, you want to find that guy that you can put in place for 10 years. Your Josh Allen's, your Patrick Mahomes is that kind of guy. But I would remind people that, look, there's a lot of movement, and that doesn't mean the Browns can't find it another way.
No, that's true. And you could envision a scenario where a guy like Derek Carr pops free, right?
Totally. Yep.
And he's okay. Here's a guy, you get him, and he can come in and change your organization or whatever. You're right about that, Tom. But the best way to do it is to find a guy at the top of the draft. It makes things so much easier. And while your point is correct, I do struggle with the idea of just kicking the rookie
I
quarterback
know.
down the road.
Yeah, it's delaying
There's
the right.
no guarantee Arch Manning's going to be there for you next year. There's no guarantee you're going to be picking at the top of the draft. Like there's so
Right.
many variables. Now, which leads me to I wanted to make one more point about Shadir Sanders.
Yeah.
And let's say they pass on him. When I look at him, I like the accuracy, I like the decision making, I like the toughness. Those things are really important.
Hmm.
What the holdups are, he doesn't throw it. He doesn't have an elite arm. He doesn't have elite mobility, athleticism, and the draft is so much about projection and potential that you have to balance those things. So if
Right.
you knew he was going to be a 72% passer in the NFL and would make all the right decisions like he did at Colorado, but a lot of the Colorado throws are quick and short, and it's not the
Right.
same as the NFL. If you knew that, and if you knew he's going to be Drew Brees, then it's a no-brainer, right? The best decision maker ever, the most
Yeah.
accurate quarterback ever, right? Or, in that ballpark, in that discussion. But if he's not, then how
And
does
he's
how
Jameis
does he make
Winston.
up for
Yeah.
it, right?
Right.
Or he's Colt McCoy, right? Because
Yeah.
there's a plenty of guys in college that completed a ton of passes and were
100%
really
right.
smart. Ken Dorsey, Colt McCoy, guys who've come through Berea,
Josh Rosen kind of
yeah,
guys. Yeah, I'm
and
with
they're
you.
just not physically gifted enough
Yeah.
to succeed every snap in the NFL. And that would be the concern with Sanders. Now, I think he throws it, I know he throws it better than Dorsey, and I think he throws it better than McCoy from a arm strength standpoint. And we saw the
Right.
deep throws at the pro day. Now the ball
Yeah.
wobbles coming out on some short passes, and that is a concern for him. But I
No
thought
doubt.
I saw enough throws during the season that had zip on them on dig routes or comebacks where I thought his arm is good enough. But if the Browns don't, to me, that's the reason you don't take him at 2.
I
Because you
agree.
like all this other stuff, but if you don't think he can be an elite guy, and if you look around the league, the elite guys are elite physical guys. Most
That's a
for the
great
most
point.
part. For the most
Yeah,
part. And
they
it's
are.
your Mahomes and your Allens, right? It's Matthew Stafford's got an elite arm. Now, is Shedeur Sanders Jared Goff? Like, I don't know if he throws it as well as Jared Goff. And Jared Goff is the number one pick in the draft. He's bigger than
Mm,
Sanders. Like,
yeah.
these are the kind of comps you can try to look for. Is he Tua, who, we could have a Tua discussion, but I think it's
Right.
that kind of comparison, and you go, oh, is that enough? And is it enough
Yeah.
at number 2?
Well, and then yeah, never mind, comparing him to guys around the league. Then you start comparing him to the other guys just in this draft class, right? And if the difference between him and a developmental Jackson Dart or Jalen Milroe or whoever else down, Shook, whoever else down the line, um, then I can see why they're in this situation, Scott. That they don't feel they're not that strong on him. To your point, that he's going to be your starting quarterback, if not from week 1, then in week 4 and on, then you go with Carter, you go with Hunter. Yeah, it's a tough one, man.
Yep. And, you met Shook. I wrote about him. The story's up at Brown Zone. I like him. I don't know if he's going to be there at 33. I don't know if you have to trade up. I think ideally,
Yeah, what'd you learn about him, Scott? Who did you talk to anybody,
yeah,
or
I
what did
talked to
you?
the OC at Louisville. So it was Brian
Uh-huh.
Brom, Jeff Brom's brother.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah. And what struck me about this time, and you know this, but he talked about getting him through the transfer portal. And he said the timeline is so short that you don't know everything about a guy. He said, we watched his film. We knew we needed a starting quarterback. We loved the way he threw it. We loved how big he is. We loved his experience. Because we didn't know what kind of leader he was. We didn't know how he could digest an offense, a system, until they
Mm,
got him because the window is so small. And I said,
right.
I said, it's the opposite of the draft where these guys get
Too
analyzed for
much time,
months.
right? Yeah.
Yeah. So I thought that was interesting. But he said once they got him, the leadership was obvious and, fit right in and was a great leader. But also his ability to pick up the offense, which I think is huge when we talk about going to the next level in the NFL. And
Yeah.
Louisville runs a complex system under the Brahms. And it's under center, it's shotgun. He said they did everything. Play action, RPOs, like they did everything. And he was
Mm,
able to pick all of it up. So when you talk about quarterback ready, and he's got to be because he's going to be 26 in September, then you have to have all these tools. And I feel like he does. He throws it great. I think he moves well enough. He's a big kid, which I like. Tommy's 6'5", 220.
nice.
The concern about him, and he's had a couple injuries, but they're broken bones, so I don't think that
Right.
bothers you. 26, it's not Brandon Whedon. I mean, it's 3 years difference,
Right.
So that to me, that's not a big holdup,
I like 26. Yeah, I hear you.
right? Yeah,
Mature. Yeah.
yeah, he can come in and play right away. So there's a lot to like. A lot of quarterbacks, he struggles when there's some pressure, and does he keep his mechanics? Does he fade too much? I think that's the question that some teams have on him. But I think there's a lot
Who's
of
your
reasons to
NFL?
like him.
Who's your NFL comp for him right now? Like, who do
That's
you
a
see?
great question, Tommy. I mean, physically, I don't want to oversell this, but this is the first guy that jumps into my mind. Trevor Lawrence is a big guy. He
Yeah.
throws it really well and moves pretty good.
Yeah.
That's the first guy because I think he likes to compare himself to Josh Allen, but he's not thick like Josh Allen. He's big, but
Right.
Josh Allen runs guys over. I don't see Tyler Shuck running guys over. So I don't think that's quite the right comparison. But they ran him like you can use him as a runner. Texas Tech did that. He was a run guy at Texas Tech. And then they didn't do that at Louisville. He was a drop back passer. So I like the
Right.
versatility. It's a crazy story because he was Justin Herbert's backup at Oregon. He was
Mm,
in the same
I didn't
recruiting
know
class.
that.
Yeah, he was the same recruiting class coming out as Trevor Lawrence. So this is his seventh year in college. He's got a bunch of degrees.
Wow.
I didn't even put that in the story. He's got like three
Yeah.
degrees. Um, so there's a lot. And he said he was with Justin Herbert and he got on campus, said, "Oh my gosh, this guy is so big and strong. That's what I need to get better at." Right? Because
Wow.
it's a young, freshman who's spindly coming out of wherever he is, Arizona.
So where do you slot him in then in that next tier with, Dart and Milrow and Howard and McCord and I'm not even sure who else belongs in that conversation. See at the top of that group for you
I
based on
think
what you've
so.
heard?
Yeah,
Yeah. Okay.
it's to me, it's him and Dart. Those are the two guys, and
Right.
there's a lot to like about Dart too. To me, I like both those guys. I'd probably go Dart ahead of Shuck. I think maybe that's just the age, um, but I like those two guys. To me, Milrow is in a different category
Yeah.
because he's so raw and he's not going to be ready. Huge upside, biggest
Got that
arm,
Tommy
best
Reese
runner.
connection too, right?
Yep,
Yeah, all
yeah.
that.
I don't like Milrow at 33. I like Dart and Shuck at 33. I like even if you wanted to trade up to 25 to get those guys.
Okay.
Milrow, I wouldn't feel comfortable at 33 taking Milrow.
More of a project, a little bit more of a
Yep,
reach. I'm with you.
that's how I
Yeah.
feel about it. And then we talked about, I like McCord. I like Will Howard. I think those guys are later, are they third round, and if they wanted to wait there, but you know how it goes, Tom, the longer you wait, the lower the expectations
That's so
get,
true. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So
No doubt.
it's just fascinating. All right. I have one more draft thing and then we'll move on to something real quick. Um, Give me a non-quarterback position that you feel the Browns must address relatively high. So we'll say first
You
three
know,
rounds, they have to address this position.
I I want to say cornerback. I just feel like, and listen, no knock on your boy, your
Northwestern
fellow
alum.
Wildcat,
Yeah.
Greg Newsome, who I like a lot. Just hasn't become that guy, right? And I feel like that secondary still has some holes in it. I mean, safety is still an issue, but they sign somebody in free agency? Remind me.
No, they
They,
still need
they
a
didn't get a
safety.
safety. So
No, they need
safety
a
and
safety.
cornerback, maybe you can lump those two spots together. So, and I know there's some pretty interesting cornerbacks, I think, available. So I don't know, just because of the importance of that position, Scott, I feel like if you could find, and listen, and I love Denzel, and you know that, and he played at an
Yeah.
unbelievable level next year. He's not getting up there in years, but there's always the injury potential with him. And it's almost like with good pitching, you can never have enough cornerbacks or defensive backs. So that's the one that jumps out to me just right off the top of my head.
Yeah, I could see
How
that.
about you? Where are you at?
Uh, I'm going. I'm going to give you two. I'm going to give you
I like
running back and tight end.
mm,
It goes back to the playmaker discussion. They don't have a
yeah,
number one running back on the roster.
no, they
They
don't.
they don't have a number two tight end, and they don't have an heir apparent for David Njoku. And this is a draft deep at both those positions. And ideally, I think you could get difference makers at
Right.
in the third round at both those spots. Now, maybe you missed the two Buckeye running backs, and I'm writing a story about them coming up. Maybe you
Mm,
miss them. Maybe they both go in the second round. If you could get the kid from Iowa, Caleb Johnson in the third round, and then I don't know if he'll be there, but Miami tight end Elijah Arroyo, I really like. Like to me, that's a home run if you can get both
nice
those guys in
player.
the third
Yeah,
round.
I like him too.
Yeah, he's got some
You
injury
know what?
history, so maybe he slides a little bit and is there. I don't know.
Yeah, and you mentioned Njoku, like, that does he bounce back, Scott, and become himself again, or is he on that trajectory to where his career's starting to slide a little bit? I think it's real, and I agree with you. I think that's a real point of need as well. Like, who else is behind him? They got the Whiteheart kid, right? Is that the only other
Yeah, I mean, I don't
tight
think
end?
I think Jordan Akins is a free agent. I have to double check
Yeah,
that. Um, yeah, there's nothing. There's nothing in the pipeline, right? I mean they did Blake Whiteheart signed his exclusive free agent or tender, but yeah,
yeah.
and I think this draft fits for that. It fits for that need. You know,
Mm.
I think they have a need, and I think this is the draft to go ahead and find that guy. Maybe he's the heir apparent. And I think this is important, Tom. They're going to go back. We assume they're going to go back to more of the Kevin
I
Stefanski,
was just going to say that
right?
Stefanski loves him some tight ends.
Yes,
Yep.
and he loves, I mean, that's the thing, right? He plays tight
It's
ends
a vital
all over the
position.
place. So
Absolutely.
I just think that's really an area where they could improve. And I think there's the opportunity to improve without a doubt in this draft. There's a Harold Fannin from Bowling Green, the kid from Notre Dame that went to Wadsworth, the Oregon kid, and I'm just saying kid because all these names get in your head, right?
I got you. Yeah.
But there's an Oregon tight end that's visiting the Browns today, Ferguson,
Okay.
right? So, Terrence Ferguson from Oregon. It's a big kid. They need somebody. I just think they need somebody. And I think there's plenty of candidates. And it could be somebody that comes in and has a huge impact if you go second round, like Arroyo or Mason Taylor, or somebody that fills into that number two row or number two
Yeah.
role, like the guys we were talking about.
And to your point, Scott, that tight end is such a safety blanket in Stefanski's offense, right?
Yep.
Whether it was Watson or Flacco or Winston or DTR, whoever was slinging it. I mean, that tight end is the guy that you're looking at in the flat or 5 yards down the field when the pocket is collapsing. He's got to be a guy for you.
Yep.
And you're right, that's a huge point of need for them right now.
Yep. And Akins is a free agent, by the way.
Okay.
All right, we got two more non-draft things, Tom, that I felt we
Yeah,
needed to clean up because we didn't do one of
sure.
these last week. Jimmy and D Haslam at the owners' meetings met with the small group of reporters, and there's two headlines that come out of it, in
Yeah.
my opinion. The one who I've written about, everybody's talked about, but I just wanted to put it on the record here. Your reaction to
Mm.
calling the Watson trade, Deshaun Watson trade, a big swing and miss.
Yeah, yeah, kind of about time, right,
Yep.
Scott? I mean, I think we all have felt this way for a long time. I mean, I think I can understand why D and Jimmy probably, kept that from going too public just because Watson's dealing with an injury, et cetera, et cetera. But I think now that you're 3 years down the line, it hasn't worked out. We don't have to, redigest everything that transpired over the last 3 years. It's been an absolute mess. You could argue that it put the franchise back, a half decade or more. I wonder how it's going to affect from a psychological perspective, how it affects Andrew Barry and the Haslams going forward, and whether or not it makes them gun shy then about, trying to find their next, do you try to take another big swing, which is maybe another reason why that they're not as enamored with a quarterback at number two as they would be in the past. So I thought it was long overdue, Scott. I think, you and I over the last 3 years have been answering that question from everybody that, whose fault is this? And we would say, look, at the end of the day, it comes down to the owners are the ones who make the final decisions. They're the ones that are signing their names to the checks. It's on them. So I think it was probably welcomed from Browns fans. It doesn't take away some of the pain, Scott, but I think it was needed and just another step forward. I would think from getting past that. What was your take on it?
Yeah, I agree so much with what you said, Tom. It wasn't news, right?
No, not
We knew it
yeah,
was a big swing and a miss, but
yeah,
it's news when the owner acknowledges it, and I thought it was important. To me, it followed along in this pattern of they're moving on from Deshaun Watson, and it's Andrew Barry acknowledging that he hasn't lived up to the trade, not calling it a big swing and miss, but just at the end of the year, acknowledging whether it was suspension or injuries, not being able to stay on the field. They
yeah,
just haven't gotten the performance that they need from Watson. So you have that. Then you have Barry's acknowledgement that they're going to rebuild the entire quarterback, which they've started. Trading DTR for Kenny
yep,
Pickett starts it, and then there's many more steps to come, and none of them seem to include Deshaun Watson. So you had this build up, and it's all we all realize this because we're all watching
yeah,
it,
right.
but this is the next step of that. And then I do think it could scar them, Tom, when you talk about a bold move at number two. I think that's
Yeah,
entirely possible. I
I
really
do
do.
too. I think they're a little bit gun shy because
Yes.
of it. How
Yes.
how could you not be, right?
Yeah. I completely agree. It's so much easier to talk about building the rest of the roster than finding that guy. Now, you can't live like that, but it's a
Right.
lot easier to go about your business like that.
Right.
And then the other point I would make is asked about accountability. I believe he was asked about keeping Andrew Berry despite the Watson trade and despite where they are
Yeah.
coming off
Yeah.
2014. And while he doesn't remove all the responsibility from Berry and Stefanski in the Watson trade and acquisition and contract,
Right.
he indeed takes final accountability. So to me, that means I believe it was an organizational decision. I think if Andrew Berry didn't want this trade, they wouldn't have made this trade. So they were
I
all
agree
on
with you.
board,
Yeah.
but maybe it was the Haslam's pushing it.
Yep.
And so that's part of it. And then there's the acknowledgement of we're not going to fire these people for one terrible move when we all believed it was the right move and we all
Right.
believed you had to be bold. So I think that's all kind of wrapped into these couple of answers from Jimmy Haslam.
I totally agree. And we're still dealing with the outside perception that we don't know what the hell we're doing
Yeah.
and that we're going to fire people willy-nilly and we've learned from our mistakes, et cetera. Yeah, listen, it was a public acknowledgement. It came just short of an apology, which I think
Yeah.
some fans were probably ready to hear. Like, we're sorry, please forgive us. So it didn't quite go that far, but it came close. And I think people at least feel a little bit better like, well, thank God, at least they finally came clean on it. And yeah, it's a huge mess. And also, Scott, I think they referenced, they've dug themselves a big hole and now they got to dig their way out of it, whatever you. And they also seem to point to this being a 1 or 2 years more for both Stefanski and Barry to get this right. Listen, that doesn't mean though that they got to get this draft correct, right? I mean, whether or not you land the quarterback of today or of tomorrow in it doesn't matter, but you got to get most of the rest of it right because by the way, the Bengals are going to be choosing players, excuse me, and so are the Steelers, and so they and the Ravens, and they got some ground to gain, that's for sure.
Yeah, and Haslam acknowledged it, what a huge draft it was. And that's one of the big questions about Andrew Berry is can he draft? And his record has been spotty, and they got 10 picks, starting with number 2. I think they have 5 picks in the top 105. This is a huge draft.
That
If
is, yeah,
they're gonna turn it around, it starts now. If Barry misses again, then he's not going to be around. I do think they have a little bit of leeway. That doesn't mean they can go 3-14 again. I just think there are some quote unquote realistic expectations being set right now, and we know
I
those
would
can
agree.
change by September. But that's the mood right now inside the organization.
I would agree.
The last thing is Haslam's also talked about the stadium, and yesterday the Ohio House passed its budget, which it's not finalized. It needs to go to the Senate. It needs to be signed on or approved by the governor. We have until the end of June.
Six
But
hundred million, right?
600 million, which is what the Browns were looking for, and it's the bonds that was the Browns proposal. DeWine had tried to counter that with a tax on online gambling. The House didn't like that, so now they're going to put the 600 million in. And we'll see if it actually gets to where it needs to go. The final budget, if it does, then has them say they will go for Brook Park. They'll figure out the Brook Park and county funding later, but they were worried about the 600 from Ohio. Again, it's not a done deal, but he said that if they didn't get the Ohio funding, then they'd have to go to Plan B, and Plan B was the renovation of the stadium. Now that's not what the Browns want. It doesn't feel realistic.
No,
But
I agree.
if this falls through, it was interesting just to have the Haslams acknowledge that they might go back to the renovation. That at one point, and it's $1 billion renovation, that at one point they were way behind. Like that was their plan, and then it
Yeah.
switched to the dome. Now the city, the county want the renovation. They want the stadium to stay downtown. We've talked about that, but it's just this is kind of the stadium update where it looks like if the House passes it, it looks like full speed ahead to Brook Park, assuming it doesn't get held up in the courts, right? Which
Exactly.
is a
Well,
big assumption.
and as you say this, I looked at the Dow Jones is down 1,700 points today. So we're also dealing with a different world suddenly too, Scott, right? And you start talking about, bond markets and borrowing money and all that kind of stuff. In today's climate, I think is another reason why they may be thinking about, hey, let's maybe just stay where we're at, take that $1 billion and rebuild this thing. I'll say this in this context too, Scott. in being down at Progressive Field this week and seeing the renovations that the Guardians have been able to do to a stadium that's even older than Cleveland Brown Stadium. And I know that there were all kinds of structural issues with how quickly they had to put that together down on the lakefront. But you can't tell me that with $1 billion sunk into that place, you can't fix the parking a little bit. Excuse me. You can't fix the walkways. The seats can't be a little bit nicer. The scoreboards can't be a little bit bigger.
Yeah.
The beer tap's a little colder. Whatever you want, whatever amenities that you need, you're telling me $1 billion can't get you there. And I get the argument about a dome. I get all of that. I just don't know if it fits for Cleveland.
Yeah, it's fascinating, Tom. We'll see. What was interesting to me is they left the door open for
Yeah,
possible renovation of the
right.
lakefront stadium, which surprised me. I don't know if that's putting pressure on Cleveland. I don't know if that was just reality of the situation, but it's something certainly to keep an eye on. And I thought that was
It almost feels like
newsworthy.
they're getting tired of the fight, aren't they? I mean, I don't want to say that. I
Yeah.
mean, they've dug in, right? But it seems like both sides are getting just kind of fatigued by the whole thing. I know you and I are, and I'm sure fans are tired of hearing about it as well. So obviously, we're going to have to get to a resolution here sooner than later. The lease is, I kept thinking, Scott, that they would just kick the lease down the road another year or two, because I don't think that makes a huge difference. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
extend the lease a year or two. Let's just get this right. Especially again in these economic uncertain times, it might be wiser to be even more patient with it.
Yeah, it's interesting, Tom. I know what you're saying there. The Haslam's feel the sense of urgency. They want to
Yeah,
begin in 2026. They want to start the construction or the digging, whatever the first step is. And I think there's also a feel that the longer you wait, the more expensive things get.
true
Now,
too.
that's a
Yeah,
tough conversation to have this week, but that's the overall
yeah.
belief. So, we'll see. You're right. There's a lot of variables out there. But again, we'll be talking about this for a while. Hopefully, just from a reality standpoint, there's some there's
Yeah,
some
need some resolution,
yeah,
right?
we
I
have some
knew. Yeah,
resolution at the end of June. Now,
just
that
the
probably
next
doesn't
step,
get all
right?
the resolution, but it could be some of it. So,
Gotcha.
Tommy, I appreciate it, buddy. I tell you
Anytime.
what, it's TBD. I know Chud's going back to TV Monday, so I
Okay,
don't know.
great.
I don't know when he's going to be pod ready. We'll see if that's next week or not. If we get one, if I got to call you off the bench again. Um, but obviously, I appreciate the time today. I appreciate the time over the last couple of months. It's been great.
Hey, my pleasure. Good luck over the next couple of weeks. I mean, it's finally getting to the finish line. I know people out there don't really care. It's a grind for the media, and this has been a really difficult. This has been difficult on a lot of levels for Browns beat writers because information is scarce. There's a lot of misleading information out there that you've got to follow up on just to make sure that your reporting is as factually correct as you can. So I'm not envious of your spot right now, Scott. It ain't easy, bro.
I appreciate that, Tommy. And yeah, we'll have, everybody can read all my stuff at brownzone.com. I'm hoping to get a mock up there within the next couple days. I said I'm working on a story about those two OSU running backs. The Miami tight end, I'm hoping to write a story about him. So there'll be drafts up. Andrew Berry is, I believe, scheduled to talk next week in his pre-draft news conference, which usually no news comes out of it. But with the number two pick in the draft, it feels like there might be. So
Yeah.
everybody stay tuned. Like I said, you can read all my work at brownzone.com. This has been another episode of the Zone Coverage Podcast, and thanks for listening, everybody.